All right, this is part 3 of the videos on chapter 15.1 in the textbook, and we've been talking about species and the definition of species and focusing on reproductive isolation. In other words, how do two different species, even if they live in the same area, how do they maintain reproductive isolation? So we talked about 5 different categories of ways in which that occurs. But what I want to do now is to go back a step and ask, how did those barriers appear? In other words, how did they become reproductively different or reproductively isolated? And we call that the process of speciation. And one of the most widespread mechanisms focuses on geographic separation of populations. So again, we're going back in time and looking at maybe how 2 similar species actually arose from an ancestral species. How did that happen? And most biologists believe that a large population somehow became separated into 2 or more smaller populations. So once we have separation, then we can start to develop differences in the gene pool of the 2 populations. So let's take a look at some physical examples of how that could occur. Let's say, first example, we have a lake, and this is our lake here. We've got fish, swimming in our lake, and a drought occurs and the water level drops. So now, instead of having one body of water, we now have 2 bodies of water that are separated by a small area of land, and the fish population that was once larger populations now divided into 2 smaller populations, and these can begin to differentiate based on differences in the environment between the 2. Another example is in a river. So, second example, where a river can change its course, and there's many examples of the Mississippi River having changed its course over time, and that produces oxbow lakes, in which the organisms that are in the lake were once part of a larger population of the river, but then now they've become isolated, and they can because of changes in the environment, they can start to become different from the larger population. A third example is where we have the appearance of newly formed land masses. In this case, let's talk about volcanic islands that appear in the ocean. Colonization of those islands from a few individuals from the mainland, so they were part of a larger population that lived along the coast. Maybe a few of them ended up being blown to these islands. They now reproduce and become adapted to the environment on these islands, and so they become different from the larger population that's on the coast. So colonization of new lands is an example where speciation can occur. One last example that I want to mention, which is somewhat similar to number 3. So this is the appearance of new land masses. And the best, or one example, is the appearance of what's called the Isthmus of Panama. And this is a narrow bridge of land that connects Central and South America. And it appeared millions of years ago, but wasn't present. And so initially there was a connection between two large bodies of water, but because of changes in the underlying continental plates beginning to move toward each other, this mass of land rose up out of the sea and actually separated then those bodies of water. And so we have many examples of aquatic organisms that developed into separate species on either side of the landmass. So there was speciation due to this separation. There's examples of shrimp and other types of aquatic organisms. There's one special case of speciation that I want to briefly talk about. Because it's an example that biologists like to study. And this is a type of speciation in which a single ancestral species gives rise to several new species that vary in habitat, behavior, etc. So there's lots of examples. For example, the finches that Darwin observed on the Galapagos. We now believe that there was an ancestral species of finch that over time gave rise to many different species, and many of them exist on specific islands within the Galapagos, different islands within the Galapagos. Also, a group of birds on the Hawaiian Islands, and these are called honey creepers. There are many similar species of honey creepers. Some of them are specific to certain islands in Hawaii, on the Hawaiian Islands, and it's believed that they are derived from a single ancestral species that ended up there because of a storm or whatever, and ultimately reproduced and gave rise to many subgroups that then became separate species. Okay, I'm going to stop there. This is pretty much the end of 15.1.